right?
Yeah.
So
that's definitely where I want to start.
My friend Chris Johnson did a book where he interviewed a bunch of atheists giving their thoughts on meaning and purpose in a life without God. And so it's a collection of essays and photographs. But he also turned that into a documentary. So if you go to theatheistbook.com, you can find the book and or the documentary, which will include my answer as well as the answer of many other people, because I'm not the ultimate authority on anything but me, and maybe not even that. But it will give you a lot of different perspectives on purpose and meaning from a secular and atheistic perspective. And if you don't want to buy the book or the movie, send me an email and I'll send you a copy of the movie.
All right. All right, cool. Well, I guess another thing I was wanting to ask too, I know, is there like a certain time limit we got right now?
We're technically in overtime, but you're one of the last two we're going to try to get to. So we don't want to go on too long, but I definitely wanted to give you some time. So go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. I guess one question that I asked Chelsea, she was the person that put me into you guys, was just like, because I'm still on the fence, right? You know, I grew up in Christianity, you know, whatever. My mom's a Christian, and she's actually been super awesome with me in this, trying to figure this out on my own and stuff like that. And I don't even know where to start. I guess Christianity is, you know, she kind of addressed this question, Chelsea did. Christianity is the faith in God. And I kind of thought to myself, I could be wrong on this, isn't atheism kind of the faith in no God?
No.
How is that?
I'm just not convinced that there's a God. None of my positions are based on faith. Faith is the excuse people give when they don't have a good reason. If you have good reasons, you believe for good reasons. And if you don't yet have good reasons, you don't believe. I'm not necessarily in a position where I'm saying there is no God. I'm saying I am not convinced there is a God. And in some cases, I'll say there is no God, depending on that, definition. But it's not a faith-based position any more than, do you believe the moon's made of green cheese?
I mean, no. Like,
is that a faith-based position?
Well, I can look at the moon and it's not green. I mean, it's white.
Yeah, sometimes, or we wouldn't have said green cheese. But yeah. So that there's a difference between having a positive belief. I believe the moon is not made of green cheese, and not accepting a different positive belief, which is I am not convinced the moon is made of green cheese. Now, I think there's ample evidence, considering we walked on it, that the moon is not made of green cheese.
Isn't there some evidence? Sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, finish.
Oh, but isn't there like some evidence that like Christianity does exist? And I'm not trying to be like,
no, like what?
Or something like that.
Christianity exists. Christianity exists.
Well, yeah,
can you clarify that a little bit?
For instance, Jesus, right? Like, I mean, I think there was I could be using this completely wrong when I say this, but I think it was an archaeologist that said something about like Jesus was in fact a real person, but there was no evidence of him being a spiritual being or something like that.
So there are people who think...
Didn't Jesus exist or something?
We don't know. I would think that would be a question where the answer had to obviously be yes if it were to be true, and now the answer is we don't know. But it doesn't matter it doesn't matter that we don't know. It does matter whether or not he existed for the religion itself. But let's assume that Jesus existed, that we have a fairly accurate record of things that he may have said, but we have no way to demonstrate that he was divine or supernatural or had powers or was God. Okay, cool. Now we're talking about a person. That doesn't in any way support the truth of Christianity. And what's worse is we can't even demonstrate that Jesus existed and we have a good record of his words. So we're in worse shape than not having any evidence that Jesus was God. I mean, one of the things...
I guess I'm just trying to figure out, or I guess another good question for you is...
Ask yourself this.
What's the problem? Go ahead.
Why are you focused on whether or not Jesus existed? Why aren't you focused on whether or not Allah was the prophet of God?
That's a good point.
You bet your ass it is. I've done this for a while, and it's one of those things that bugs me. It's like, how did you decide that God was? How did you decide that God was the good one and Satan was the evil one? We are focused on the. It's like I said earlier. My fear of hell went away because I realized how many other religions' afterlives had I been worried about, and the answer was none. And if I was only going to be focused on the afterlife of the religion I was indoctrinated in, that seems to me just absurd. So what I did in my journey was to say, okay, I clearly don't believe in Christianity anymore, but let me find out what kind of God could exist. And I'll explore this at the level of philosophy, of let's define, what kind of God might exist, what would a God be like, and all those things. And I found out that there's no good reason to think that anything that would qualify as a God has ever been demonstrated to even be plausible. So I had to give it up.
But in a weird way, and I'm not trying to disagree with you or anything like that.
Go ahead.
In a weird way, that's what makes it safe. So
I love it when people disagree.
Well, I'm not really disagreeing with you.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Honestly, kind of following up with you, but doesn't it take? It kind of takes a little bit of faith to be like, okay, there's something wrong here, No,
that's called logic. So when you understand how we go about being reasonable, and what the value of logic is, and understand that fallacy, when a syllogism is fallacious, that doesn't mean the conclusion is.
Wait, what?
All right, a syllogism is a logical argument.
Sorry, yeah, dumb it down for me, man.
Good, because I'm getting ready to do a whole series of videos on this, and it's good that I know where I need to start. So let's say we want to be reasonable. We care about truth. We'd like to be as correct as we can be and avoid being wrong. One of the methods that we've found, and it's derived from mathematics, 1 + 1 = 2, or actually mathematics is derived from it. But a logical argument is, in its simple form, a syllogism, premise 1, premise 2, and conclusion. And so you take facts or things that you accept and you plug them in. And if the syllogism is of a valid structure, I'm using too much jargon.
Oh, you're good.
There are arguments that are what we call sound, which means they're a proper structure and we accept the premises. There are fallacies. We can demonstrate this particular argument structure. We cannot be reliably convinced that the conclusion is true. So when you find an argument that's fallacious, that does not mean the conclusion is wrong. It just means you have no reason to believe the conclusion is true. Okay? So there's a process of learning about syllogisms and fallacies. But at the end of the day, here's the key thing. I want to be reasonable. I accept that an argument that is unreasonable cannot lead me reliably to truth. So you could say, Socrates is a man, all men are mortal, therefore the grass is wet. That's a fallacious argument because the conclusion doesn't match up with anything in the premises. But the grass might still be wet. It's just the reason you're offering for the grass being wet is not one that can guarantee that the grass is wet. That's it. And so if you accept things, that's the power of a reasoned argument, is that you're recognizing we have a mechanism to make sure that if we are diligent, we don't accept something as true without good reason. That doesn't mean we think it's false. It just means we reject the argument and reject the conclusion. And by reject the conclusion, that just means we don't accept it. Doesn't mean we think it's false. Once you understand that, then it takes work to go through the things you believe and say, did I have a good reason for this? And if somebody can point out to you, when you put your thing in an argumentative form, here's your fallacy, then the reasonable person says, you're correct. I may still, in fact, believe there's a God, but that argument isn't going to do it. So now I need a better one. Now, I know most people on the planet are not going to do this at the level that others will. But here's the thing. There are some diligent, intelligent individuals who have spent, over the course of millennia, their entire lives addressing these. And here we are in 2019 with not one demonstrably sound argument that would serve to conclude that a God exists. Nada.
Right, I agree with you on that.
So,
but then why is it still a problem all these years?
Because people keep believing.
Sure. And they're made to propagate.
You think the problem is because people are just too afraid to admit that they don't know? Because that's a hard pill. That's a hard pill for me to swallow.
I think there are a number of reasons. I think people believe for different reasons, and they will give it up for different reasons. Yeah. I think that some maintain that belief out of fear. A lot of fears that religions exploit, like the fear of being alone, the fear of not knowing, the fear of an afterlife, the fear of hell, all of these things. Also, I think that there's certainly comforting aspects to religion, that I'm going to go see Grandpa again in the future, that the child that I lost to cholera is waiting for me in heaven. All of these things, we value them, and it keeps us from recognizing that we are being unreasonable because these things feel good to us. And that's not in any way saying that people are stupid or people are lazy, even though some people are stupid and some people are lazy. This is what it is to be human.
People are scared.
What the reality is, you don't have time to become an expert in everything. And so you are prone, as is everybody, to just taking people's words for things. Hey, everybody around me believes in Jesus. We're all standing in church. We're singing. I feel goosebumps. They all tell me it's the Holy Spirit. Of course I'm going to believe it is.
Yeah.
Why would I have anything else to think? It's like talking about the notion forever, for ages, that the earth went around, or the sun went around the earth. Because that's what it looks like. It looks like the sun goes around the earth. So it's not that people were stupid or boneheaded or anything to think that was it. It was obvious. All of the available evidence they had led to that conclusion. And then when we got more evidence, that changed. But there's nothing about the notion that the sun goes around the earth that people take into their core and say, wow, the sun is going around the earth because it really cares about me and it wants to reunite me with my loved ones and it wants me to have a good life. And so that idea is easy to change when we get new evidence. But the notion that there's a God, no matter how many times you point out the fallacies, the fact that there isn't good evidence for the proposition, that's not enough to disprove it. And what people fundamentally do, all of us, and some strive harder than others to not do it, is say this: I am convinced of X, and I will remain convinced of X until you prove me wrong. Mm-hmm. But the problem is that the God proposition is unfalsifiable, meaning there is no way you can prove it wrong. And so people will keep believing. Yeah. You can think of it like inertia. An object believing continues to believe unless acted on by a force.
Right. Because even my experience, it wasn't something that I wanted to give up. Like, that wasn't what I had in mind when I first started examining those things. But it was, I guess, being willing to be honest with myself about my beliefs and actually looking at the book that I grew up with and seeing how much it had changed over time, depending on which version you had, who it was written by, et cetera, and then accepting the fact that I grew up with this book, but this may not actually be the correct word. Therefore, I won't be a Christian anymore. I'll just be religious. I still had a God belief because I didn't want to give that up. But then it started, like, those questions, and that was okay for several months before more questions started kind of creeping up, saying, well, why am I holding on to this? Why am I believing in this specific deity, this, father figure type of deity that I was introduced to? I still had this belief. I didn't identify as Christian, but why am I holding on to this one? Why not any of these others that were out here? And how I couldn't justify it to myself as to why I'm sticking with this one, besides the fact that I grew up with it.
It's funny.
It's a very interesting process.
There are certainly people who are incredibly intelligent, who are incredibly knowledgeable about, let's just stick with the Bible, who are believers. But the overwhelming majority of people who identify as Christian don't really know all that much about what they believe, don't really know all that much about why, don't really know all that much about fallacies or what is or isn't reasonable. They don't know all that much about the history of the book that they praise. Most of them have not even read the book that they praise.
Wow. Yeah.
That's the way it is, because as far as I can tell, the truth of what most religious experience and activity is on planet Earth is about we are social creatures, and this social group, because we're not nearly as naturally tribal as we were when we were spread out all over the place, here's a Southern Baptist church in this town, here's a Southern Baptist church in the other town. If you move from town to town, you've got a ready-made community that already shares your beliefs without having to do any work. And they'll bring you a potluck while you're moving in. They'll watch the kids when you have to go turn your electricity on, you know.
Yeah, here, let me ask you this. Let's assume that I was a full devoted Christian. You know, one big question that pops up to me is what's so liberating about being an atheist? Because it's just like, you know,
what difference it makes?
Even though I might be alive,
I don't care what's liberating.
It's like I feel better knowing that I would see, you know, one of my dead relatives, you know, at some point.
I feel better thinking that too.
It's over.
So I don't care whether it's liberating. I care whether it's true. And yes, it would be comforting in me to think that, I'm going to get to go to the afterlife and see all these people that I haven't seen. But if it's not true, then what I've done is I've set up a system that does not encourage me to treat people right the first time. If I think I get a do-over for eternity, am I going to focus as much on treating the people I care about better or worse?
I guess it would be, I mean, like,
it's not as important.
Worse in what area, I guess?
Well, I'm convinced that when I'm dead, I'm dead. I think the notion of a soul is the most obviously false idea in any religion. Now, because I think when I'm dead, it's over, that changes the way I live my life. Under a notion where I'm going to live forever, all of human existence, however many years I'm here, every great meal I've had, every sexual encounter, every bit of art, every bit of music, all of that means nothing. This is a place to wipe your feet before the real life begins. I find that to be just a repugnant idea anyway. But if I'm convinced that I get one shot at this, it fundamentally changes how I live my life. It fundamentally changes how focused on me I'm going to be, or how bigoted I'm going to be, or what types of things I'm going to engage in, and whether I'm going to leave this place. If you think you're dying and you go rent a house and you think you're going to die there, you're not going to be concerned about cleaning it up for the next person. But if you think that this is your one and only life, how you leave things for other people is something that is likely to be a concern. When you think about things like climate change, I remember years ago listening to Rush Limbaugh, who was pointing out that everything's going according to God's plan. God is ultimately supreme. Man could not possibly destroy the earth, and therefore we don't need to give a rat's ass about climate change, because God will come back and rapture people and we'll end up in the tribulation, and then there'll be a new heaven and a new earth. It fundamentally changes what things you're going to do. And if I thought that I was going to, let's say I was estranged from my father, I'm not, and I thought we were going to see each other in heaven, I'm less motivated to make things right now than I am if I think at any minute either of us could die and that would be the end of all of it. That's a pretty strong motivator to let's fix this bullshit between us.
That's really powerful. That's powerful, man.
And that affords a lot of the volunteer work that I do and other non-believers do, because you look at the life and the people around us and the situations that people are involved in, and if you don't have a belief in an afterlife, you're looking at that like, if this is their only shot that they have, what can I do to make their life a little less shitty? What can I do to make things a little better for them? And it really incentivizes you to actually start doing something, to start going out and volunteering. And that's why I do a lot of the stuff that I do, is because not only do I recognize that their lives are short, the people whose lives I can affect, but I also realize mine is short. And so the impact that I can have is also limited by the small amount of time that I have here. So let's do something with this small amount of life versus just kicking back, because I can be just kicking back at the house, chilling now, not worrying about anybody, because fuck it, we got other places to go. But if this is it, if you got this 60, 70 years, you need to do something. That's my view. Not everyone has that view, but that's the way I look at it. And since becoming atheist and not having a belief in the afterlife, that has really been one of the biggest changes of my life and how I approach my interactions with the rest of the world and what I want to do with my life.
Let me tie this back to what you said, and then I'll give you the last word, and then we'll finish up the show. You originally were talking about meaning and purpose in life, and I think we've kind of touched on that a little bit. But so I think the example that I've used many times is that would you want to live in a world where your parents and the government decided what your job was going to be?
Oh, asking me that?
Yeah.
No, I would not.
Most of us wouldn't. Most of us would revolt against that. And yet when we talk about meaning and purpose from the perspective of religion, everything is an externally imposed purpose. God has some meaning and purpose for your life. I don't know why anyone would rejoice in that when they would rebel against any other authority imposing their will over their life. But irrespective of which one is more appealing, there's no reason to think that there is, in fact, any externally imposed life. And that is, in fact, liberating, although that's not my criteria. I care about what's true. But it turns out not having a God belief is incredibly liberating. I mean, this isn't even controversial. That's one of the biggest arguments against atheism, because they will say without God, anything is permissible. And they think that you're just engaged in debauchery and destroying everything. But the truth is, without God, you don't have this notion that everything about you is wrong, that everything you do is wrong, that somebody's watching over your shoulder, that somebody cares about who you sleep with or how you love people, that somebody cares about whether or not you're on your knees or whether you pray 5 times a day, that there's not somebody who says that, if you rape a young woman, you have to actually marry her. All of these notions that come from different religions go away. And what we're left with is the recognition that we're human beings stuck on a rock in the middle of space. We have to share space. We know enough about game theory and cooperation to know what's in our best interest. We have the benefit of thousands of years of human history to teach us how to be more moral, how to care more about other people. And I can do all of it without even a passing thought about an afterlife, about whether or not some God is going to think that I'm worthy, when most religions are not about how good you are. It's about how much you love God, and then they just try to define God as good. But if there's a God who says that it's okay to enslave people, that men are better than women, fuck him. He doesn't understand anything about morality or humanism. He's a thug. He's the narcissist somebody else was talking about. So yeah, I think that a rejection of the notion that there is a God is not only the most reasonable position, but is in fact incredibly liberating and in an incredibly positive way. But check out the book. Check out the movie.
Yeah, what was it called again?
TheAtheistBook.com. It's a book and a movie by Chris Johnson.
Called A Better Life.
And all the parts that don't have me in it are outstanding.
Dude, this is just so I feel like it's so complex to put my mind around. Because I'm 18 right now, and this, I've been living in this religion for all my life. And I bet there's people, some religious people watching the show right now, and they're distraught, oh God, an 18-year-old coming out of religion. And I'm honestly terrified, but I'm so glad that I'm kind of recognizing this, because I've been asking myself a lot of questions just about religion. And I've questioned a lot of the things that I do, and religion's always been the hardest thing for me.
Keep going. Keep questioning. Sure. Nobody's I called the Atheist Experience in 20 minutes I was an atheist. No. Find some folks to hang out with. Find some folks that are similar-minded. Find a local organization. Keep asking questions. There are people sitting in the audience today here at the studio who aren't atheists. I appreciate the fact that they made it through the show, an incredibly long show. And I'm hoping that they're all open-minded. My condition for life is not, let me fix everybody to be like me. It's let's have the conversations and see if we can all be more reasonable. Because